Welcome back to the deep dive. We're plunging right into the heart of global events again, aiming for clarity. Today, our focus is squarely on the Russia-Ukraine war, a really complex topic. Our mission, as always, is to sift through the material we've looked at, pull out the key insights, and give you a shortcut to being well-informed without getting buried in information. Okay, let's dig in.
Absolutely. And, cutting through the noise on something this huge is so important. Our goal here is just to provide a clear understanding, origins, dynamics, potential ways forward based on what the research shows.
Okay, so it's easy to think this all kicked off February 24, 2022, the full-scale invasion, right? But the sources we looked at, they paint a longer picture, don't they? Going back to, 2014?
That's a really crucial point.
Yeah.
The 2022 invasion was, obviously a massive escalation, but the fuse, it was lit much, much earlier. The sources are clear on that. Tensions really spiked back in 2014. You had Russia's annexation of Crimea.
Which really boosted their naval power in the Black Sea.
Exactly. And then the emergence of those pro-Russian separatists backed by Russia in the Donbas.
Right, eastern Ukraine, that industrial sort of culturally distinct area.
Precisely. So it wasn't sudden. It was a long simmering crisis building up for years.
So understanding that long simmer, what did our analysis show were the real root causes driving this? It sounds like a mix of things. Geopolitics, history.
Oh, it's definitely an intricate tapestry. It really is. And what's fascinating, I think, is how these different threads, geopolitical strategy, historical claims, regional control, they all intertwine. Our findings point to a few key drivers. First, Russia's strong opposition to Ukraine getting closer to the West, particularly its interest in joining NATO.
Which Russia sees as a fundamental threat.
Fundamentally, yes.
Yeah.
An existential threat to their security sphere. Then there's Russia's aim to sort of reassert influence over former Soviet lands. Ukraine is vital in that view. And of course, those unresolved issues over Crimea and Donbas. Key triggers still. And finally, there's this powerful element of Russian nationalism. President Putin's claims that Ukraine is historically part of Russia.
Undermining its sovereignty.
Exactly. What the sources really underscore isn't just that these factors exist, but how they interlock. It creates this kind of geopolitical knot.
Like Gordian knot, yeah.
Yeah, where trying to fix one problem makes another worse. And that deep entanglement, that's maybe the critical insight into why peace has been so hard to find.
That makes sense. Those deep roots explain why resolution is so challenging. So, moving to that, what did the sources show about attempts at peace, the international response?
Well, the big takeaway is, despite a lot of effort, no formal ceasefire yet.
Still nothing concrete.
And the sources suggest it's often a fundamental mismatch in what each side sees as non-negotiable. That makes traditional mediation incredibly tough. We've seen attempts, though. Turkey hosted talks early on back in 2022.
I remember that.
Belarus was a venue for some initial negotiations, though. They didn't succeed. Even China put forward that 12-point peace plan last year.
But that didn't get much traction, did it?
Limited traction, yeah. Sources pointed to questions about neutrality, lack of clear enforcement. And the UN, they advocate for aid and ceasefires, but their enforcement power is limited.
And outside direct mediation, the roles of Europe and the U.S., pivotal, wouldn't you say? What stood out there?
Oh, absolutely immense. The U.S., billions in military and economic aid to Ukraine, severe sanctions on Russia, intelligence sharing, training.
A huge commitment.
Huge. And European nations, too, rallying with weapons, aid, taking in millions of refugees, Germany, France, the UK, Poland, all playing key diplomatic and sanctions roles. And a really significant impact highlighted was Europe drastically cutting its dependence on Russian gas.
That's a massive energy shift.
A huge pivot, yeah, driven directly by the conflict.
So the response has been multifaceted. Looking forward then, what do the sources suggest about pathways to actually resolving this? What are the options or maybe the biggest hurdles?
Connecting this to the bigger picture, the pathways outlined are all profoundly challenging. Take a negotiated peace. It would need this incredibly delicate balance, Ukraine's sovereignty secured, but somehow Russia's security concerns addressed. That's a massive diplomatic hurdle.
Almost seems contradictory.
It's very difficult. Then you have ideas like security guarantees for Ukraine, maybe not NATO membership, but really strong protections. That requires rethinking European security entirely.
A whole new architecture.
Exactly. And we can't avoid the really tough one. Territorial compromises, Crimea, Donbas. It fundamentally challenges Ukraine's integrity, a huge sticking point.
Understandably.
And finally, any lasting peace, sources suggest, has to involve justice for alleged war crimes. that adds immense legal and ethical complexity on top of everything else.
It's definitely a complex web. We've tried to offer a clearer lens on it all today. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
And maybe a final thought for you, the listener. If we connect all this, the tangled origins, the difficult search for resolution, the global involvement we've talked about, what do you think is the single most challenging piece of the puzzle to actually achieve a lasting peace in this specific conflict?